Here's Mike Schubert reading Holes by Louis Sachar.
There is no lake at Camp Green Lake. There once was a very large lake here, the largest lake in Texas. That was over 100 years ago. Now it is just a dry, flat wasteland. There used to be a town of Green Lake as well. The town shriveled and dried up along with the lake and the people who lived there.
Welcome to Pages Past, the podcast where we visit the Library of Memory. I'm Genna Buck. In each episode, I invite a guest to choose a book from their far past to read and discuss. Through conversation and close reading, we find new meanings in our old favorite books. Today, my guest is Mike Schubert, host of the Newest Olympian, Potterless, and many other podcasts. Potterless was such a companion for me throughout the pandemic, and I was so honored recently to get to be a designated Canadian on the Newest Olympian. So I'm a huge fan and so excited to have Mike on my show. Welcome, Mike Schubert.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. I am excited to be here. So thank you for giving me the wonderful excuse to reread what I've said for years and years and years, and there's the receipts of this on my podcasts. My favorite book of all time.
Awesome. So you have chosen Holes by Louis Sachar.
Oh, is that how you say his last name? I've been saying Sachar my whole life.
So here's the thing. I looked it up and I found a little audio of him saying,
"Hi, my name is Louis Sachar. Most people don't know how to pronounce my name."
Oh, man. Louis, I'm so sorry. I've been butchering your name for decades.
Could you tell us just very briefly your first encounter with this book? What age would you have been? Around what year would it have been? What do you remember about your introduction to Holes?
Sure. So I believe I was 8 or 9. You probably have a better understanding of exactly when this book came out.
1998.
1998. Okay. So I would have been 6 then. I feel like I was a little bit older. Maybe I was, let's say I was 7, or 7 or 8, something like that. I was a smart kid in terms of like reading prowess. Reading interest was not there though. So I had, just read kids books and stuff. And then when it started to get into like legit chapter books, that's where I was kind of losing interest. I remember being young and enjoying the Matt Christopher sports books because I played a lot of sports back then, still do, but back then it was like loved all the sports and stuff. So those were good. And then my sister, who's 4 years older, was getting into reading more like fantasy type stuff, and she was really enjoying it. And my mom tried to get me to read some of the same books she was reading. So I believe I read the first in the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe series. So not the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, but the one with like the green and yellow rings and the guinea pigs. And I hated it. I really didn't like it. I don't think I even made it to the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe because I disliked that book so much. And then I know I read some other stuff. Like I read Roald Dahl books and I read The Phantom Toll Booth, but I don't remember if it was before or after. But regardless, Holes was the first book that just like absolutely hit for me. And the clear memory, I can still see it like clear as day, crystal clear. I was in my childhood bedroom in central New Jersey, and it was over the summer, and the whole thing that my parents had set up for me was like, you just got to read a chapter of a book, or maybe because Holes chapters are so short, it was multiple, but there was some sort of like, before you go to sleep, you got to just read a certain amount. And this was the first book for which I remember going downstairs to my parents who were watching TV, and I said, "Mom, I've read however many chapters. Is it okay if I keep reading more?" And my mom's look of just like, of course you can, Michael. Yes. And then I remember going up and reading, I want to say now that I've like read these and got a sense of how short they were, and there's 50 in the whole book, I would assume my parents were like, you got to read 2, and I read 10. And
Wow.
then I just like kept reading that many and just like plowed through the book, and I just absolutely loved it. I was so captivated by the story. I was so concerned for Stanley. I felt so bad because he was unjustly put in this correctional facility camp, and the plot twists kept me going. I wanted to make sure Stanley was okay. I felt like there was injustice happening to him, and I just really enjoyed it. This book just really kind of helped me enjoy reading, and it's very fun now that reading is basically my job.
That's amazing. And it's so interesting to think that this could have been the spark that indirectly helped lead to this.
Well, I think it's legitimately a thing. So for anyone unaware, I've made podcasts, Potterless and the Newest Olympian, which are both about me not having read fantasy series as kids and then reading them as an adult. And I think this was a key thing in me not wanting to read Harry Potter, because it would have been a little bit later, I think, for when my sister started reading it. But I remember clearly that my sister loved it. And I remember, okay, another fantasy book. I read those fantasy books. I hated them, so I'm not going to do that. And Holes specifically, I remember the thing I liked about it, and I kind of linked this to the sports books that I liked. It was, I like books where I can imagine myself as the main character. I like books that are more similar to my life. I don't have any interest in a book about a kid wizard. Like, that just seems too outlandish. So I think my disdain for the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe series, coupled with my love for Holes, which was more grounded to me, that made me steadfast in, no, I'm not touching Harry Potter. So I think it was incredibly directly responsible for my life and career.
What an incredible domino not falling.
Thank you for staying up. Thank you, Louis. Thank you.
Indirectly, thank you, Louis Sachar, for Mike Schubert's career.
Truly. I don't know if that guy is still around.
He's still around in his 70s, yeah.
Oh, good for him. I should send him some sort of letter. I should craft him a letter, send him an email, just like fire it off and just say, hey, I don't know if you're ever going to read this. Because I get a lot of, hey, I don't know if you're ever going to read this stuff. And I do read them. So I would love just to send him a, hey, I don't know if you're ever going to read this thing, and thank him. Because, it's weirdly like butterfly effect. I think it all does lead to where I am today, which I'm very happy with.
Before we go any further, we're going to drop this book into history and recap it for those who haven't read it or haven't read it in a while. Fair warning to the listeners, this is your last chance to turn back. This podcast absolutely runs on spoilers. Holes by Louis Sachar is a middle grade novel published in 1998. It won the Newbery Medal for Children's Literature, was adapted into a movie with Shia LaBeouf in 2003, and remains widely read and loved, especially in elementary school. It tells the story of the unlucky 14-year-old Stanley Yelnats, who is blamed for the crime of stealing a pair of sneakers belonging to the baseball great Sweet Feet Clyde Livingston. Stanley is sentenced to 18 months at a correctional boys' camp in Texas, Camp Green Lake, which is not a lake at all, but a dried-up lake bed where the boys are forced to dig holes 5 feet deep and 5 feet wide, all day, every day. There is no need to cage the boys in, as the desert is so hot and so vast that escape would mean certain death. Stanley's family believes their bad luck is the result of a curse on his dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather, Elya Yelnats. In Latvia, Elya received a piglet for a dowry from a one-legged, possibly Romany woman named Madame Zeroni, in exchange for a promise that when the pig was fully grown, he would carry Madame Zeroni up a mountain to a stream and sing her a song she taught him, or else be cursed. Elya's bride was a dud. He immigrates to America, and he forgot his promise. Elya's son, the first Stanley Yelnats, made a fortune in America, but lost it because he was robbed by the outlaw Catherine Kate Barlow. We also hear Catherine's story, which takes place 110 years prior to the events of Holes. She was a school teacher in Green Lake before it was plagued by drought. She refused to marry a local rich man, Trout Walker, and instead fell in love with a black onion farmer named Sam. Townspeople spot them kissing, and Walker leads a mob to lynch Sam. Catherine becomes a notorious outlaw who leaves lipstick prints on the men she steals from and murders. Her first victim is the town sheriff who allowed the lynching. 20 years later, the spurned Trout Walker and his wife try to get Kate to confess where she hid her loot, but she does not, and they kill her. Back at Camp Green Lake, while digging a hole, Stanley finds a lipstick tube engraved with Kate Barlow's initials, KB, making it clear to the reader that the camp's sadistic warden, Ms. Walker, is making the boys dig holes so she can look for the outlaw's long-lost loot. Stanley does not tell the warden where he found it. Stanley befriends a fellow camper nicknamed Zero. Zero never learned to read, and Stanley strikes a deal to teach him in exchange for Zero digging part of Stanley's hole every day. The optics of this aren't great as Zero is black, and this causes a confrontation with other campers and escalates into a fight that sees Zero escape into the harsh desert. Stanley hears the camp warden's plan to simply erase Zero. Stanley also runs off into the desert and finds Zero taking shelter in a boat that had once belonged to Kate Barlow's lover, Sam. Stanley carries an ill and exhausted Zero, whose real name is Hector Zeroni, up a mountain to a stream to drink and sings to him the song his great-great-grandfather failed to sing to Zero's ancestor, Madame Zeroni, perhaps lifting the curse. Stanley and Zero dig in the hole where Stanley found the lipstick. They find the suitcase full of valuables that Kate Barlow stole from the first Stanley Yelnats. The two boys return to camp, where there is a lawyer waiting because Stanley has been found innocent. Zero's records were deleted, so he gets to leave too. The suitcase contains enough treasure for Zero to hire investigators to find his missing mother, and for Stanley to buy his parents a house. Stanley's father invents a cure for foot odor. It is endorsed on TV by the baseball player Clyde Sweetfeet Livingston. The end. And that is Holes by Louis Sachar. About a month ago, before I read the book and before Mike started rereading it, we got on a call together. He told me what he could remember and what he was excited to revisit. Here is a little bit of that conversation.
I am excited to see how funny it is, because I don't remember laughing, but I'm sure it's funny. I'm sure it's also funny reading it as an adult, but I'm intrigued to see any amount of humor in there. I guess just like I'm intrigued to see like the writing style. Is it going to feel like I'm reading a kid's book, or is it going to be like when I reread the Percy Jackson books, or I guess read them for the first time for the Newest Olympian, where it just feels like well-crafted books where the main target audience is children, but any age can read it and not feel like you're reading, boring little books. I don't think it's going to read clunkily, but I'm intrigued just to see like what the writing style is. I feel like for a particular passage, I feel like whenever, because I think it's his grandpa, whoever tells the no good, dirty, rotten, pig stealing great-great-grandfather story, I think that's going to be great, because it's probably, I would imagine that Louis Sachar put like a bunch of flair on that, where it's like classic grandpa telling this grandiose story. And I feel like that will be really funny to hear from an old man fully convinced that all of the shortcomings of their family are because of this cursed relative and the pig.
Mike, you recalled this book in incredible detail and recounted it almost perfectly in its entirety, despite you having last read it about 23 years ago. And you had only just a couple of things wrong. The grandfather told a story of Stanley's dirty, rotten, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather. That wasn't in there.
Yeah, I think it's a movie thing, because this book is like, movies got to do a thing where you solve the narrator problem. And I'm pretty sure that was a movie scene. When I was reading and then also listening to the audiobook, because I switched back and forth when I was rereading this, I just like couldn't remember the ending at all. Just like absolutely not. And when I was reading it in prep for the podcast, I was truly in the edge of my seat, because like my memory stopped at Stanley saves Hector, and then I was like, I couldn't remember what happens after, except like happily ever after. Truly didn't remember the ending with the commercial and Sweetfeet being there and like the lawyer coming in and it being Stanley Yelnatz's suitcase. Like all of that was a complete, almost new thing for me because I just completely forgot it. I remember being very surprised at the ending. It felt like very legal jargony. And even Stanley admits, like, I don't know what the AG is, blah, blah, blah. So I guess that's like the adults get it. And as a kid, you're just like, oh, business. So it was funny, like how in the weeds it kind of got there. But I also thought it was interesting. It was fun that it was like filling in the holes was like a literal and figurative type thing. And they just kind of like jump a year and a half forward. And then they just say like, I don't know, man, you figure it out. I feel like there's sometimes with endings where they do something like that where I don't like it, but I actually really thought it was cool because you finish the book wondering, how did they find Hector's mom? And how did the Sweetfeet deal happen and all this kind of stuff? The movie kind of shows you all the things that happen. And I think it's more fun for you to fill in the blanks. I thought at first when they set that up, I was like, I don't know how I'm going to like this. And then by the end, I really liked it because it just doesn't matter. What does matter is that they're all together. And it's kind of a fun experience for the reader, especially a kid, to like do your own thing. Like, I feel like if you're a English teacher covering this book in class, you see that and you fist pump into the sky. Because what's the homework assignment? Write what happened in the year and a half. Boom. Like, silver platter, T-ball, baseball bat, like, boom. It's such a toss-up. And a layup, alley-oop, slam dunk, it's perfect.
There's a reason why this is so loved in schools. Like, there's many, many reasons, because it's got that fairy tale structure. It's got all these different things to analyze and really powerful imagery. And it invites you to imagine. It invites you to participate and speculate and reflect. So it makes sense that it is a classic novel study and probably will be for quite a long time to come. Was there anything else that surprised you on your reread? What was the same or different to what you remember, or what just read differently as an adult?
Yeah, I think it felt like really children's booky. You know, like the camp was hot. Stanley was on the bus. He was sweating. There was dirt. Like, it was a lot of just short. And reading this, I was like, is this going to be fun? Like, am I going to, I was like, I get it. I'm very much not the target audience here, but like, it felt like it was going to be a drag. I think once the characters started speaking and dialogue got in there, it got a lot better just in terms of like the pacing. And then also I think it's very smart for the book to kind of do a lot of back and forth story structure so that you don't just get like 3 straight chapters of Stanley digging holes. That was very smart. But like early on, I was like, man, this is a little bit of a drag. But I think that kind of went away once dialogue got in there. And I'm also particularly used to, both with the Harry Potter books and especially I think with the Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus books, those authors, when they start to do scene painting, it's like they crack their knuckles before the paragraphs. Like Rick especially, it just feels like sometimes it's like, all right, let's describe what the castle looks like. All right, let's describe what this new monster looks like. And it's just, those are some of my favorite passages in Rick Riordan books. So I think I'm a little spoiled coming off of like, here's the description of Aeolus, the god of the winds, boom, boom, boom. And it's like so much fun and so flowery. And it's just like straight narration with no dialogue, which is like a rarity in the Percy Jackson and Heroes of Olympus books. So it's like a little treat. And then I just kind of felt the opposite of like, oh my gosh, wow.
You told me that this book helped unlock your love of reading and that this is still the answer that you give when someone asks you, what is your favorite book? Did you love it that much this time? Do you think that's still true?
I'm going to say yes. I still would stand by like that it was not the smoothest of reads, but I still was really enjoying it. I still loved it, and it was fun, especially as an exercise for me to realize what I remembered, what I didn't remember. And I still think I would say that it's my favorite book because of what it did do. I think your answer for favorite book does not have to be the same thing as the book you are most likely to reread or the book that you have read the most times. And I think that can translate for your favorite movie, your favorite album, just because you can have a favorite movie, but it can be like a real gut punch of a film. And maybe you're not going to rewatch that movie a million times. There's things that can be differently defined. So for me, I would still say it's my favorite book just because it's still a fun read. I still enjoyed it. I still thought it was great. And it's still just so important to me for what it did for my life, just as a reader, but then also career-wise.
We always choose a theme to read the book through. And together we came up with the theme of justice. And we were inspired by little you and your intense sense of justice and injustice. And the idea that Stanley had been done an injustice and that you're feeling for him and empathizing with him and feeling so indignant on his behalf. Did you have that experience this time? And where else do you kind of see justice show up?
So I think that theme was definitely still there. I think even more with justice, like, as I said, shocked at how much like the justice system and the legal system comes into play here with like the description of Stanley not having a lawyer and then getting a lawyer and the patent lawyer at the end. And then also just with like the camp not wanting an investigation. I think justice definitely hit in terms of the theme that I had in mind. And then it was way more present than I had anticipated, which was cool.
Yeah.
And then even like you get into stuff with like Sam and Kate, like that's not fair. The stuff with Elia and Madame Zeroni, like it wasn't fair what happened to him with the marriage proposal thing. It wasn't fair what he did to Madame Zeroni. Like there's a lot of things with justice and injustice that I think I accidentally stumbled upon the perfect theme.
Yeah, it really is. I have a few questions to get us talking about to try to find justice in this text and try to like extract some ideas about justice that might be in here.
Sure.
One that came up right away is kind of the question about whether Camp Green Lake is doing any kind of work of justice, that Camp Green Lake is part of this justice system. And obviously it's quite fantastical. It's like comically terrible. But these kind of correctional boot camps for kids exist.
Yes, I have learned that because in the Heroes of Olympus books, in the first one, they have one. And I remember just kind of having, not like a rant, but I was just like, this seems so corrupt. How is this happening? Like, and I think on the podcast even, I was like, this is so unbelievably corrupt. There's no way this would happen.
It's real.
And then a lot of people reached out and they're like, yo, this is a thing. This is an actual bad thing where these things happen. So like, maybe it's not that outlandish. I don't know. I guess I was skewed by being like, clearly Holes is a farcical story and this feels like Holes. And then people are like, might be kind of real, my guy.
There are these really cruel, it's like sometimes called the troubled teen industry, like private, lucrative, like private corrections for minors. And I don't think it's as fantastical as Camp Green Lake. But I'm kind of wondering if the story is trying to tell us that Stanley did in some way need to be reformed, or that Camp Green Lake somehow changed him for the better. And I am puzzled by that. And I'm wondering where you land on that.
I would put it more as Stanley made the most out of a bad situation. And I think he recognizes that as the narrator because there's often discussions of, was he in the wrong place at the wrong time? Was he in the right place at the right time? His luck, the curse, all that kind of stuff. And early on in the digging, Stanley kind of thinks, well, at least I couldn't get in shape. That's kind of cool. I don't know if it was saying that Stanley needed to be reformed. I think it was more of like Stanley made the most of the situation. And there's other instances where I think Stanley just kind of realizes like there's no sense in pushing back. I thought it was a funny thing, and this was, I think, really well done by the narrator and Lewis in terms of writing, is the note where he says, before he got to camp, when he told people he was innocent, no one believed him. And then when he got to camp and he's trying to fit in, something I definitely relate to as a kid, like when he's trying to fit in and say, oh yeah, I stole shoes from this famous guy, no one believes him. So it was that's I think a fun little nugget. And I thought that was very interesting. But yeah, I don't know if it's that he has to be reformed. I think it was just that he was trying to do the play the hand you're dealt kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then also as far as like the camp itself, I don't think they're doing anyone any favors because they forbid Zero from learning how to read. Like that was crystal clear that they just want to try to find this treasure and they're not actually doing anything. And just like the corruption, I knew that the people were bad, but like the level of corruption of Mr. Pendanski, Mr. Sir, and the warden was just like comically bad. And I guess it's so that the kids can like really paint it clear, but there's that one chapter where you only just see them like after Zero leaves, or they're like talking about torching his file and how they're going to cover up the evidence and all that kind of stuff. And then of course later when they're like actively having that conversation in front of Stanley and Zero in the pit, that is just like, okay, like these people are like evil. And I think the camp is extra super bad.
It's so interesting to see that in a kid's book because normally like adults in kids' books are kind of good or evil, right? And like that this is, and one of the messages that we're trying to give kids is like, there's adults you can trust and you can go to those adults, right? And Mr. Pendanski initially is introduced as a foil to the scary and malevolent adults. He is positive. They call him Mom. But he is corrupted by this corrupt institution. And like, this is what happens to adults who are surrounded by corruption. Like they become complicit. And that is a big idea to have in a kid's book. Like Mr. Pendanski is dark.
Yes, I think he's the most interesting character in the whole book. And I remember as a kid being conflicted and confused when he was so mean to Zero. I remember being very confused but he's supposed to be the nice adult. Why is he so mean to Zero? And he's especially rude. Like, I knew he was rude as a kid and I remembered that. But like reading it, he is truly awful to Zero.
Yes.
Truly awful. And I can't think of any other justification except for racism, which the book deals with. Like, if that's the answer of why he hates Zero, sure, and I can see it. But then they very directly deal with it when it comes to Sam and Kate. And I was pleasantly surprised with how much they didn't shy away from it and how much it wasn't implied, but it was just straight up. I've forgotten that it was just like very directly. Woman sees them kissing. Woman says it's illegal. The sheriff says it's illegal. And, you know, like they make it very clear, you know, Kate saying, I kissed him back. The sheriff saying it doesn't matter. There's no law against it. Like, it is very clear. And I think that's awesome for this book, which is so captivating story-wise, to very kind of directly teach kids racism is bad and it was bad in the past and it's bad today. And I think that's awesome. I love a book that sneaks in a lesson for children without you really realizing it. And I think they did a very good job. And I wouldn't be surprised if Holes is banned in Florida now.
Yeah. Let's talk about that part, because this is something that I had forgotten about. I remembered the scene from the movie. You know, I remember Dule Hill's character in the movie. So I knew that it dealt with kind of 19th century racism. But there's a lynching in this book. And it's depicted how this was seen as a sort of frontier justice. That this is a way of bringing like justice to the sort of racial and social order, and that this was a type of political violence. And looking at it this way as an adult, it read so differently to me, because I think, and I would be interested to hear kind of how you perceived it as a kid. But like when you're a kid and they're telling you about racism, they tell you something like they treated people with a different skin color differently. And that's not right, right? That was kind of the way that this was understood. It's like, it's not fair. And that's sort of the end of the story. I don't think that kid me, I also read this not that long after it came out. I was probably a little older, like maybe like 11 or 12. But I don't think I knew what lynching was. I don't think I knew that this is something that happened for real.
Yeah.
And that this was like systemic. Something I think is really, really interesting is the passage that describes this murder that takes place. The sentence that it starts with, I thought that was a gut punch. It says, "These are the facts." The narrator almost like turns and looks right at you. He doesn't say, "This is how the story goes." He says, "These are the facts." And that even though, you know, Kate Barlow is not real and Sam is also fictional, that this type of violence played out over and over and over, and things just like this happened for real. And once you know that this was like a huge epidemic of political and racial violence that required this huge social movement, this anti-lynching movement to correct, reading it as an adult is like, oh, wow, like this huge multi-decade issue this story touches that, and that was real. And that reads so differently to me than when you're just a kid and you're like, everybody should be treated the same.
Right. I feel like as a kid, probably at this age, so if I'm like 6, 7, 8, I feel like my understanding of racism is more of using different water fountains, sitting in a different part of the bus. Like, it's those kind of stories, and not as much of people are getting murdered. And I think the thing that I probably didn't realize as a kid, or maybe I did, I don't remember, but I think a surprising thing, and a pleasantly surprising thing, is to put in like the police is corrupt. Like, just to have that in the book, like the sheriff just being so, I remembered him being drunk and asking for a kiss, but it was very nice for me to see just like how truly terrible the sheriff was, how much he didn't care, how much he was okay. Like, it's very quick in the book where it's just like, we're killing him. Like, just straight up, he says it, no dancing around it, no, you know, no dilly dallying. It's just straight up like, yeah, I'm gonna let him burn down the school, and we're gonna kill this guy. And if you kiss me, then we'll just run him out of town and we'll kill him. But like, we're gonna kill him. And it's just, I was very surprised in a good way of just like how direct it was. And I think it's a great thing for kids to read and to talk about with their parents, their friends, their siblings, their teachers, whatever. I think it's an incredible teaching moment, and I think the book like knocked it out of the park. And that was something that I knew was in there, but I didn't remember like how exactly they handled it, and I was very pleased with how they did.
The sheriff is so malevolent, and this is a big contrast to a lot of literature that's for kids, which is like, go to the police if you have a problem, right? The police is your friend, and they're there to help.
Yeah.
No, he says the law will punish Sam and God will punish you. And he makes this nasty sexual overture to her where it's like, if Sam and I are equal, why won't you kiss me? Which is just that gross, misogynist, like sexually tinged threat, which I actually kind of remember being a kid and thinking, why didn't she just kiss him to save Sam?
Yeah. I think that's definitely something I would have thought of as a kid. I don't think I would have processed the sexual assault nature of it. I don't think I would have got that because, as a kid, it's like, well, just give me a kiss, whatever. It's just a kiss. Like, you have to kiss your sister at, church, whatever.
Yeah. And I think now as an adult, like, I understand that this was like in process and there was no chance that Sam was going to survive.
Oh, absolutely not. Yeah. I think that's something you don't recognize as a kid as much.
There's a mob.
Yeah. I mean, and also like I was already hoping to read this with my daughter. Now this is like this has become required reading as once. And I'm excited because with this book being a little bit easier, because people are asking me like, oh, when are you going to read the Percy Jackson books with your daughter and all that kind of stuff? This feels like I can do it even earlier. And I think it'll be cool to have this type of conversation about all the different things with injustice in these books like as early as possible. And I think it'll be very fun. I'm excited. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think like, I'm not that familiar with contemporary middle grade books, but, there's a movement to sort of sanitize books that are for kids this age, which is like disgusting, tragic, so frustrating. And I am a little surprised that I haven't heard anything yet about attempts to ban holes, but I wouldn't be surprised if that is forthcoming.
I think the key is that people probably don't... The type of people trying to remove these aren't necessarily the type to read the books.
Oh,
and
that's
it's
true.
not like a main plot point focus. It's like buried in the middle.
You're
and
right.
It's not about the main character. So they're like, oh yeah, it's the boys and they dig holes and there's lizards and stuff. Okay, yeah, that one's fine.
That's fine.
So they don't remember that, in the Neapolitan, the middle flavor is racism.
What a way to describe this text. It's true, though. It's a surprise racism sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Which is what we all need. Because
Yeah.
otherwise, you're not going to get into that conversation.
You're just, it's very possible to avoid those conversations unless you are personally affected or involved. There's so many other places where we can find justice and injustice in this. The one that I am wondering about is Stanley and Zero striking this deal.
Yeah, this was the most like, if I was going to have a conversation as an adult, like this is the one where like I still don't know how to feel about it. And I was very impressed with like how the book brings it up, but the kids basically just being like, you're a slave owner, Stanley, and everyone dogpiling on. That was one where I'm like, I don't know.
Stanley starts to experience a little bit of white guilt.
Yeah, I mean, he questions it himself, which I think is the right thing. I don't know. I think the key thing is when Stanley says, I got to conserve my energy so that I can teach.
Yeah.
He has a final thought towards the end, and it doesn't really get resolved, but he thinks, if I'm trying to conserve my energy to teach, is it fair that Zero is not conserving his energy to learn? And even the next step, like he's putting in more effort. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, teaching is hard. I think if you're learning is just as hard, if not harder, when it comes to being a kid and trying to learn a skill, especially something that like you should have already developed. So
Yeah.
this was I think of the reread, the most compelling of like, for me, because it is kind of gross what happens. But is it like they do have a deal and it's not bad, but when you think about it, like it is kind of bad. I don't know.
to quickly recap, Stanley and Zero strike this deal where Zero is going to dig part of Stanley's hole for him every day so that Stanley, in exchange, Stanley is going to teach Zero to read. And he's going to get a little bit of additional rest so that he has the energy to teach Zero to read. And it's almost like an in-kind exchange of sorts. But the optics of it are that a white man is sitting down in the shade while a black man is doing his work for him, or a black kid is doing his work for him. And I kind of wondered about this, like, is it really because maybe Zero feels like it feels more fair to him and it feels less like charity to him if he's able to do something in return for Stanley, and maybe that is important to Zero, but like, do you not see how this looks? But like, how do you explain optics to like a 14-year-old?
Yeah, it's interesting because I think for the kids, for Zero and Stanley, it's just them. It's like the beautiful thing when you watch videos of people who look very different and they say like, describe your best friend, and they never describe like their physical attributes. Like what? Yeah, it's like one of those videos where you have like a white kid and a black kid, and it's like, what? How are you the same and how are you different? And they just talk about like their interests and personality, and it's beautifully wholesome. This kind of feels like that, where I think they're just both so pure that they don't realize it until later, or at least Stanley doesn't realize it until later. But it is just straight up, I can teach you to read. You do not know how to read. I'm really good at digging holes. I like digging holes. I'm not bothered by digging holes. You've said that the limiting factor is that you're too tired.
Yeah.
And that's like a genuine thing, because as the narrator, that's Stanley when he's first presented with this. He's like, man, I'm way too tired. I got to conserve my energy. Like, it's a legit thing. I think it's just Zero. And I forgot that like Zero's great at math and not great at reading, which is such a good thing. I freaking love that, and I forgot that.
He has this innate talent.
Yeah, I think it's just him looking at it in a very mathematical approach where you just view it as like a formula. Like, I think it is purely just like they have struck a deal that makes sense, and then they don't realize until after, or at least Stanley doesn't realize, like, they're
in society.
I don't think Zero's ever bothered by it.
Doesn't seem to be, no, but the other black kids take umbrage on his behalf, which is so interesting because otherwise they're completely contemptuous of Zero. But they have this racial solidarity toward him, and they feel like this doesn't look right. And like, the racial ideas in society kind of creep onto what is otherwise a wholesome and beautiful friendship. And that happens with any type of interracial relationship dynamic. Like, you're in a relationship with the person you love, the rest of society is still out there and is going to like read things onto your relationship. And to show this in a kid-friendly way, I think is so, so interesting.
A tangentially related thing I do have to say is that the kids, X-Ray specifically, I remember not liking X-Ray when I was a kid, and I stand by it because he kind of sucks. But they're very good bullies, and I like a book where the bullies are good. One of my biggest critiques with Harry Potter, Draco Malfoy, not actually a good bully. He's just like, your parents are dead, you're poor. Like, he's not actually a good bully. And I don't think real-life bullies, at least the effective ones, because I was bullied a bunch, the effective ones are not like that. They are like X-Ray. The fact that the bullying that they do is that when they see Stanley doing this thing, they like make him go to the front of the line. They say, like, please let me dig your hole. The Zigzag does the shoving the cookie in his face thing.
Oh,
like,
it's awful.
That's so the like weird, like being overly kind as a way to be mean, shove it in your face kind of thing. Oh, it's so much more effective as a form of bullying. And I think like Louis Sachar wrote good bully. They are very good bullies.
Stanley is in this impossible position where he can't accept the gift, or they're going to bully him more, and 100%. He can't easily just get out of the situation. It was scary.
Right. And there's a couple of different times where it's just like Stanley's in a no way out situation, like when he's getting pummeled by Zigzag, and I think the narrator says something to the effect of, there was nothing he could do except wait for it to be over. It's like, oh my gosh. And you can like definitely envision yourself, especially me, because like I never learned any sort of fighting. I didn't do wrestling or karate or anything like that. I've never been in like a real fight. But as a kid, like there were a couple of instances where I remember like being in a situation like that. I can exactly envision how Stanley would be, just like, I don't know how to fight. This kid clearly knows how to fight. I just have to hope it stops and hope someone stops him? ?
Terrifying. And there's a reason you remember that is because it's an effective kind of bullying.
Yeah, they're good bullies at both types. Like the X-Ray, like word, more verbal abuse, head game bully and stuff, like trick you, and then Zigzag more of just like, your typical kind of like punk.
Reading it now, I felt so much empathy for X-Ray as someone who can't see very well.
Oh, yeah.
He's at such a disadvantage. I think that he feels threatened, he feels weak, and he really can't he can't help that he doesn't see well and that he can't keep his glasses clean and that he
Right.
depends on other people, and that makes him like his defense mechanism is that he's nasty. And I feel for him a little bit, even though he's obviously a punk. We've arrived at our close reading segment, and you have chosen a passage where we meet Mr. Sir. Mr. Sir is like, what would we call him? Like a middle manager?
Yeah, he's the mid-level boss that you fight before the big bad.
If you are listening and it's safe for you to like close your eyes and just listen and let this text wash over you, don't do it if you're driving. Picture yourself into the scene. You could be a character or a fly on the wall or even an object or an animal, and just listen to the words and picture yourself. Where are you? What do you see? What do you feel, smell? And how does that kind of make you feel? What does it make you think of? So I will read for us this time. A man was sitting with his feet up on a desk. He turned his head when Stanley and the guard entered, but otherwise didn't move. Even though he was inside, he wore sunglasses and a cowboy hat. He also held a can of soda, and the sight of it made Stanley even more aware of his own thirst. He waited while the bus guard gave the man some papers to sign. "That's a lot of sunflower seeds," the bus guard said. Stanley noticed a burlap sack filled with sunflower seeds sitting on the floor next to the desk. "I quit smoking last month," said the man in the cowboy hat. He had a tattoo of a rattlesnake on his arm, and as he signed his name, the snake's rattle seemed to wiggle. "I used to smoke a pack a day. Now I eat a sack of these every week." The guard laughed. There must have been a small refrigerator behind his desk, because the man in the cowboy hat produced 2 more cans of soda. For a second, Stanley hoped that one might be for him, but the man gave one to the guard and said the other was for the driver. 9 hours here and now 9 hours back, the guard grumbled. What a day. Stanley thought about the long, miserable bus ride and felt a little sorry for the guard and the bus driver. The man in the cowboy hat spit sunflower seed shells into a waste paper basket. Then he walked around the desk to Stanley. "My name is Mr. Sir," he said. "Whenever you speak to me, you must call me by my name. Is that clear?" Stanley hesitated. Yes, Mr. Sir," he said, though he couldn't imagine that was really the man's name. "You're not in the Girl Scouts anymore," Mr. Sir said. Okay, who were you?
I am the intern who just started at Camp Green Lake, and I have come here with a 12-pack of Coca-Cola and a couple more burlap sacks of sunflower seeds, and I'm restocking Mr. Sir's supply. But I also know that I have to make sure he's done talking, so I just have to stand in the room and let this conversation happen, and then when it's over, I can go, Mr. Sir, I have your sodas here for your fridge and more of your sunflower seeds that you need. Is there anything else I can get you? And I also like to envision that he's like Mr. Pendanski's like cousin or something. Like that's how he got the job. It's his first day. But I just imagine being like, I guess because Stanley feels this way, but just kind of like paralyzed in fear in the room, waiting for your turn to speak. That's who I am in this room.
I love that you created a new character. I think that's awesome. What an improv guy thing to do. And like, did you try to think about like picturing this place? I was thinking about how it must smell. It's so hot in there. And it's so, I think we hear that there's air conditioning, but like in general, you're like hot all the time. You're like sticky. It probably smells like, I don't think that they're like necessarily keeping up with like the sanitation standards of the correction department, you know, like, I don't know. I feel like it's grimy, and sunflower seeds are to me kind of gross because like they've been in someone's mouth.
If you eat them indoors, and even like I like that he was spitting them into a waste paper basket, but he also kind of feels like the guy to not like bring it close to his mouth. So in my imagination of this, like there's definitely ones like on the desk and on the floor that like didn't make it. He's not doing the thing where you like bring a cup directly to your mouth or spit them outside. So yeah, I think there's definitely some of that going around. I just imagine like, even though there's air conditioning, this feels like a big ceiling fan that's moving too slowly to do anything kind of place. Also feels like there's like the blinds that aren't doing like a very good job and sunlight is streaking in. I also just imagine, I guess because of like the power dynamic, I just imagine this room being like too large, like than it needs to be. Like this is just like, all this is his office, and it's just got like a desk and his chair in it, but it's like way bigger and there's a bunch of empty space, but it's just kind of like the power trip thing of like, my office is huge even though it does not need to be huge at all.
He's so ostentatiously enjoying things that the boys don't get to have, right? The space, the air conditioning, the sodas. I think that I was Stanley, which is what you're supposed to be.
Of course.
But I felt so thirsty. I think because we've been having a heat wave here that's been dragging on, and I've had this experience recently, and the idea of seeing that Coke right in front of you and then it being handed to someone else, I really felt the pain of that. And I also felt the emotion you feel when it's like you're about to be dropped off at your first day of camp, or you're moving away from home for the first time, or you're going into your dorm room in university or something, like that. It's the first day of something and you're leaving home, or you're leaving your parents, and you're about to experience like homesickness, that anticipatory homesickness. I really felt for Stanley in that unknown. You're going into the unknown.
Yeah. See, I felt for Stanley in the thinking a thing is for you and then realizing it's not for you. With the soda, that was the most relatable of like, oh yeah, I've been there. Ooh, I thought this was gonna be a cool thing for me. I thought you were, I thought girl is writing her phone number to give to me. No, it's to give to me to pass to Fred or whatever.
Ouch. Oh yeah. And you feel almost like a bit guilty or implicated, or that other people are like, oh, he thought he was getting this.
It's not crushing enough that the thing that you want is not for you, but it's the next level of like, and I'm an idiot for thinking it was for me. Yeah.
Yes, like enjoy this shame. Yes, that inadequacy with like it's sprinkled with the reinforced by what you've just seen around you. It's like, yes, you are correct. Nobody wants to talk to you, or yes, you're correct. You don't deserve a soda.
And you're bad for thinking so.
Yes. Any final thoughts before we close out our close reading?
This book slaps. I'm so glad it still slaps. It's great. Everyone should read it. Everyone should read it with young folk in their lives. This should be like mandatory reading. People in Korea have to serve in the army for 2 years. You have to read this book if you're in America. I guess in Canada as well. But mandatory. You have to read this book.
We're nearing the end of our time together. It's time for our closing questions. One of our closing questions is past life homework. We're imagining Mike at the age he was when he was reading Holes, sometime between 7 and 9. We're not quite sure. If you're able to put a book in that little boy's hand for him to read, what would you like to give him for homework?
I would want to give him some sort of book. I don't even know what book this would be. I don't know if there's like a biography about it or just like an explanation, but I would like a younger Mike Schubert to know that you can have a job in like a creative comedic world without just being like the person. Like you can be a writer for a late night talk show host. You can be behind the scenes on Saturday Night Live. Like you don't just have to be the famous talent. There's other things, because I just don't think I really recognized that, especially when I got older and I knew that I was interested in creative type stuff. I just thought like, well, I have to become famous, or someone has to see me perform at a thing and give me a job offer, or like I have to nail an audition. Like I didn't realize like, yeah, you can just like run the ticketing at a stand-up club and then you meet people and then blah 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 blah. So I would want to put some sort of book, I don't know if it's like Martin Short's biography or something, like some sort of book that could let Mike Schubert know you can work in the creative field at an earlier stage without being like the guy. And then that can help you become the guy if that's what you want to do.
I love that. Do you think it might have changed, if he hadn't known that?
I feel like I probably would have, instead of doing, like, I knew, I would have, like, maybe with my internships and stuff, tried to do something like that, because, like, my goal in college was always, like, just get the job in engineering and then do creative stuff on the side, and hopefully something kicks off and then you can jump. And I did that, and that was awesome, and I'm very, very grateful. But maybe in my little, like, thread the needle sort of plan, maybe I would be like, okay, I'm going to get the engineering degree, but, like, what if I got an internship at Second City or something where it's like, the internships were at your actual interests. Your degree is still in, like, the thing. And then if the interests, like, take off where you get a good job there, cool. And then if not, it's still just, like, a nice experience to have had. And maybe it can help your whole, like, you're doing the stuff you actually want to do once you're off the clock. So I think that's probably where it would have changed. And I am okay if this doesn't happen, though, because I love my current life. So
That's
I'm
great.
happy with not messing that up. And, everything that led me to where it is, I'm happy. And I don't want to change it.
That's awesome. So finally, not every book can be a classic, even ones we really love. We always have to make choices. Not everything stays on the shelf. Some things go down those library stairs into the stacks or the archive to make room for new things. But some things truly become classic and are shelved in perpetuity. So for holes, would you say library or would you say archive?
Oh, absolute library. In the most prominent part of the library, top left book, whatever we're doing to where it is in the key spot. Because, as I've said, it was so important to just me being okay with reading books. And then now, just because of, like, how it's all gone with my life and career and stuff, like, it's such an important book. And it's good. And it's really good. And I was very happy just to see, like, how good of the messages are within the book. Way better than I remembered, which is a awesome thing. And I just love it. And I have so much love for this book. And I'm glad it's so popular. Like, I know it's won awards and all this stuff.
For a reason.
It just makes me so happy that this book is so popular because of those messages. It makes me so happy that this book is as big as it is. It just brings me so much joy.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending this time together. Where can people find your work, or is there anything you're working on that you would like to share?
Oh, you can find me all over the place. So if you go to my website, schub.es, you can see all the podcast stuff I do. But the ones I've referenced, Potterless was me reading the Harry Potter books for the very first time, starting at age 24. Never read them before, made my way all the way through and did all the other spin-off stuff. And then J.K. Rowling started being a terrible person. And I was like, I stuck around for a year making fun of her and pointing out her terribleness. And then I was like, all right, I'm going to switch. And then I switched to Percy Jackson, and now I have a new podcast ongoing weekly called The Newest Olympian. Made my way through the Percy Jackson books and the movies and doing the TV show when the seasons come out. Now we're on the Heroes of Olympus books. Also with, like, kids reading stuff, I have a charity podcast called Meddling Adults, where I host and guest compete to solve children's mysteries from, like, Encyclopedia Brown, Scooby-Doo, all that kind of stuff. Encyclopedia Brown book number 1 would be right next to Holes. I still have my copy from when I was, like, 6. So that... just, God, I have so much love for my boy EB. But
me too.
That's a fun podcast as well. And then very different, I have a comedic one about basketball called Horse, where me and my buddy Adam Amawala just try to explain basketball to people who might not be basketball fans. Or if you are a basketball fan, give you a more lighthearted thing. We talk about current things in the NBA and the WNBA and history as well. I have some other things in the works, but they're not, like, coming out yet. So I would say just, like, look at my website and then my social media at Schub17, SCHUBES17 on Twitter and Instagram for things about that. But there's new podcasty and non-podcasty things in development. I do a lot of things, and if you don't know them, check them out. If you like me, and if you didn't like me, why you're still listening. You must really like Genna.
You're probably one of my friends and family that I have legally forced to listen to this.
Oh my God, would they stop talking about holes? It's been 90 minutes.
Not a chance. Thank you so much, Mike Schubert. This was so fun.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Pages Past. The show is a production of Yikes Media and me, Genna Buck. The theme music is by Kevin MacLeod. Find out what books we're reading next and keep up with the show at pagespastcast.com and on Instagram at pagespastcast. If you want to get all of your content and news early, join the free Patreon at patreon.com/pagespast. That's PAST. Through my paying patrons, this project is funded and made possible by listeners like you. Thank you. Special thanks to Hillary, Alex, Robin, Sam N., Sam E., Mike Schubert, and everyone at the Stony Brook University Podcast Incubator. Questions and responses on this program are edited significantly for length and clarity. I make every effort to represent conversations faithfully. Training any automated program on this content is explicitly prohibited by the intellectual property holders. Until next time, I hope all your library holds come in early, and happy reading.